Great. So today we're going to be talking about aligning your Salesforce approach to align with the organisational culture. And it's quite an important subject because you could walk into an organisation and you do really need to think about how does its organisation operate in order to not ruffle feathers, because you don't want to ruffle feathers from a management point of view, or talk to people more sort of lower down in the organisation and suggest or propose something that may not be possible, and might, as I sort of, create tensions if you get it wrong. So it is quite an important subject to make sure that you're being considerate of the organisational culture and that you can identify it and that you can have the right conversations to tailor your consultancy approach as we go through. So I'll share a little bit, unpack what that means. So just to introduce myself, I know many of you know that are listening know who I am, who are here on the webinar today. So great to meet you and any new people. So I'm Heather Black, CEO of Supermums. I've been doing Salesforce consultancy now for 10 years. I've actively done a lot of Salesforce consultancy projects myself, but now I oversee a team of 20 who implement Salesforce projects, particularly focused on charities and non-profits in the UK. I've seen a lot about where projects can go not as well as possible, and learnt through that myself around actually, well, what do we need to do better next time and how do we approach things? And that sort of journey of doing Salesforce consultancy led me quite quickly to sort of believe that I needed to train up in business analysis, change up in change management, train up in agile project management. And also I went on Salesforce's consultancy cloud course, a consultancy course that they used to do and no longer do, which was a week-long course initially, and that gave me the raft of skills. And when I started out, I thought, well, I've got my Salesforce admin, that will be fine, but quickly sort of realized actually there was these other skills and these other disciplines and thought processes that would make me a better Salesforce consultant, particularly when I was going out and advising other clients about how to implement Salesforce. And really, I think the biggest challenge is not necessarily advising on Salesforce, but about bringing that whole team along with you. And that's why I talk a lot about in these webinars about the change management disciplines and the business analysis disciplines, because they're the things that you need to be considerate of when you're communicating to people and bringing that along. So the skills that I very much advocate for people as they develop their Salesforce career is, obviously you start with the admin qualification, but it is really about digging into these other areas and starting to build on it. So today we'll look at sort of change management discipline, but the other areas around business analysis, project management. And within our consultancy skills program, we also go into Sales Cloud and Service Cloud features, and I give you business analysis scripts about understanding what questions to ask as you work through with a client and reflect on what they need from the product. So it's very much sort of that handhold script to make sure that you're considering what the client needs, but also the technical considerations. So overall, I like to empower people to have the right skills so they can achieve the right outcomes with their clients, which is about the right solution, having good user adoption, having good business success, and good customer satisfaction. And if you develop these skills, then you can obviously add a lot more to your salary than if you were just a Salesforce admin. So I hope from the webinar today that you go away with some top tips that you can immediately apply to your work as a Salesforce admin. But equally, if you want to come on board with us and develop more of these skills, there's a lot more to talk about and share, which I find is fascinating when you kind of bring it to life. It's kind of like you don't know what you don't know until you know it, and you're like, okay, I get it. I understand where it all kind of sits in place. So in the last webinar that I ran last month, which is now on our YouTube channel, we looked at people and different emotional states of people. Whereas in today's webinar, we're going to be talking about the organisation. And there's lots of things you'd be wanting to know about the organisation, but we're going to hone in specifically on culture of the organisation today. And this is called the POPIT model. And they're the 4 areas that you should consider when you're implementing a CRM solution. So when we're talking about our approach to culture, there's a few things that you would be thinking about. One is you can reflect on the culture of the organisation to anticipate their readiness for change, because you might find that some organisations have a culture where change isn't the norm. They're used to doing things the same way and they have been for years. So actually a change for them might be quite stark. So it's important to understand and see, is this organisation usually quite nimble? Are they always managing and feeling changes? Is that normal to them, or is it going to be quite a stark contrast? That's the first thing that you need to ask yourself. The second is there a desire for the culture of the organisation to change? Because when you put in a system and processes, it can implement a type of way of working that can change the culture of the organisation. And you have to ask if that's what organisations want. And the reason this is important is because you can go into an organisation, implement a new process, a new system and a way of working, which will standardise the way people work. But if that culture does not change with it to some degree, and everybody still carries on doing their own thing, then you might have a problem where that CRM is not adopted. So inevitably, when you have a standardized process or a standardized system, you do start to change the culture of the organization to some way to be, we'll talk about machines in a minute, but a machine is quite a standardized, structured approach to working. You do start to embed that a little bit more. And you have to talk to the client about that, or your employer, depending on your role, and anticipate if people are going to move in this direction and start to adhering to a more structured approach of working. So it's being mindful of, is there going to be a change in culture? The third area is who is driving the change, and we'll come on to why this is important in a moment, and it can help you figure out a little bit maybe what the culture of the organization is, because what you want to do is, where did this idea come from? Where did the motivation for a CRM come from? Who instigated it? That's what you're looking out for, and the reason for that will become clear in a moment. And then the fourth area, which is the one that you reflect on, is what is their existing organisational culture? What are they doing right now, and how do they operate? And there's a way that you can talk about that, and we'll be looking at these 4 different organisational structures and metaphors, which were researched and put forward by Gareth Morgan in 1986. There are other theories and other organisational culture sort of methodologies out there, so this by means isn't not the only one, but it's the one that I was taught through the change management course that I went on. And so I'm going to just share with you 4 different types of organisational culture that you might come across, and indeed where you might have worked previously. So we're going to talk about machine, we're going to talk about political, organisms, and flux and transformation. And I'll just reflect back on where you might see or feel this in the organisations you work with. So the first one we'll talk about is a machine type culture. And typically this is an organisation where the need for a CRM is driven by senior management. So all senior management are saying this is the way that we need to work. The assumptions would be that management is controlled, that there's a well-defined structure and job roles. It's very much led by objectives and performance frameworks. Procedures and standards are very well defined, and the compliance and discipline is expected. So they're the assumptions of what you're seeing. So where you might see this typically is in organisations where compliance is really important. So you might, they could be as financial regulatory type organisations, health related systems, anywhere where, you know, doing it by the book is absolutely essentially so important that there's risks if you don't. But you might also see this in larger companies, where, you know, if you look at our mobile phone handlers, you know, there's a way, if they pick up the phone to deal with a customer inquiry, they'll have scripts that they need to work through. All of the calls, all the emails will be expected to be tracked and saved in their own sort of CRM system. So any organization that's got very standardized processes and ways of working, you know, might be driven by machine. The benefit of this type of organisation, particularly given that it's the senior management that are enforcing it, is that executive sponsorship is going to be very high, because there's very bought-in approach to say this is now the way we work. But typically what you'll find is that the design process, and when you design a solution, is that they will probably minimize the amount of consultation they will do with any frontline staff. I've very much done delivery in these types of organizations as well. I mean, they can be small, they can be large, but it's the senior management team going, this is what we want, this is what we need, this is the process, and they're driving what it will be. And there's that, they just want to make those decisions and then tell the staff how it's going to be run. So on these types of projects, you've got to be considerate that actually they may not want a full discussion, breakout workshops, interviews with some of the frontline staff, because they want to decide, and they may decide that because there's certain compliance they need to run with, there's certain ways they need to manage their projects. They don't want them to get involved because there's too many voices around the table, is the other thing that I've heard. You know, there's too much interpretation, and they just want to say, right, this is the way that you do it, and you crack on. So the guiding principles are very much is change must be driven, it should be planned and controlled. Targets will be set out. Change can be disruptive and resisted, so they are aware of that, but at the same time resistance can be managed. And they're the types of organizations where if somebody does not comply with this, they will be going, you know, they will lose their job, and that, or they will choose that they need to decide to leave. You know, it's very much that way of working, because particularly if you're in a compliance type of relationship, or it's essentially important that a job is done a certain way and there's no way around it, it's very you know, this is the way that you do things, and it requires that buy-in from the senior management to communicate, educate and support people to make sure they're moving all in the same direction and they know clearly what the business rules are. So that's sort of your guiding principles for machine. So you may well have worked in areas like that, and please do put in chat if that resonates with you, and we'll have a look when we get to the end. Now, the second is political, and this is where you might find there's somebody in the organisation that maybe has been there for quite a long time, and they have identified that, you know, we need a CRM, we're going to do this, and they lead on it. They gather a group of people around, then they find people who are bought into it, so they get a powerful group of individuals and supporters, and they create what is a coalition, which looks great in principle, that they've identified it. They could be the exec sponsor. They might need to find an exec sponsor if they're not at that level, but what they'll do is identify other people in the organization who want a CRM too, and they'll bring together a steering group, and pull it together. Now, where I've seen this fall down in CRM projects that I've worked on is that if a senior management team aren't on board, you may not have the executive sponsor that you need who is brought in. So that powerful person might be, you know, leading their way, but if they can't get the other senior managers on board, that can be a problem. The other key risk is that powerful person might leave, in which case, if there is no executive sponsorship or senior management team brought in, the whole understanding and rationale and drive for a CRM might get lost. And I've absolutely seen this in organizations I've worked with, is, you know, that person's left and nobody's holding the baby anymore, and people don't know why they've got a CRM or how to use it because nobody sort of really took it on. But part of that is about making sure there's a team that is embedding and managing that CRM beyond that powerful person. So again, you might have seen this in an organization. You know, I would recognize it where a CEO isn't in the room, other senior managers aren't in the room when I'm talking. It's just one person who's been identified as the exec sponsor, but other people are kind of out of the picture and not that interested. So it's kind of more where there's one person driving the change. So the guiding principles for this is that the change requires new coalitions and negotiations. The reality is also there's winners and losers here too. So there'll be people that really get bought into it, but ultimately there will be losers, and there'll be people that who don't buy into it will potentially end up leaving the organisation. There'll be new people that insert power and allocate resources. So that powerful person might escalate their power. They might be put into a new role because they're leading on this change, and they will bring together people on a coalition who then may get more of a senior role or a level of power that they didn't have already, maybe making them as part of the Centre of Excellence or a Salesforce champion steering group, for example. So they're the kind of things that you need to think about. But this powerful person in a political environment needs to lobby and get other people on board. There needs to be that wider support for change. And sometimes the benefits of this is that, you know, if they are very influential and have been there for a long time, they're the person that you want to have on board, particularly if they've got these types of people, because they have a better influence maybe over other people, as opposed to maybe a new CEO that started, you know, in the organisation. A new CEO, sorry, could have come into the organisation and be like, right, you know, we need a new CRM. And everybody's like, why? We've been fine. We've been working all this way, all this time. And she might not have the trust and influence of the team to sort of get on board. But if she can work, and there's a powerful person in that team who's been there a while, they could work together and sort of move it forward. So again, a couple of things to sort of be aware of where it's triggering from. The next is organisms, and this is where this could be large or small organizations, interestingly enough, as well. I've seen it in a big national charity as well as smaller ones, but this is where there's less structure. So you might have departments within an organization that are all using their own system. Might be different instances of Salesforce, or it might be completely different CRMs, but each team will effectively find out, procure, sort out their own solution. I quite often see this where, you know, we've gone in to do a solution for fundraising, and I'll say, oh, Salesforce can do X, Y, Z for you. And they're like, well, we just do our own thing, right? And it's very difficult to engage with other departmental leads or the CEO in this process. You know, every team kind of works in isolation. So that's kind of your point where you go, okay, I get what kind of organization this is. The other thing to be observant of, and this is where it comes from quite often, is it might be down to HR improvement teams that are driving this change. So this team might be saying, look, we need this system in place because our competitors have it and we can't win without us getting this. Or from a compliance point of view, we need this system in place because for our team to be compliant, we need it. So everybody does their own thing based on the need of their team to be more successful, hence why improvement team it can be triggered from. So there's this set of interrelated systems that they all kind of sort out their own problems. It's not to say that departments don't talk to each other. There can be a flow between that, but where you might see a very siloed systems in an organization, and there needs to be more linkage between them. And that's where you might get a project where you've got lots of integrations happening, because maybe you need to link up those separate systems, but there's not the will to kind of create one system. They have to work in a different way. So the guiding principles are changes are externally influenced. So that kind of goes back to the point that, you know, what is triggering this team to make this change? Well, it might be because of competitors, it might be because of compliance, it might be because they need to do things better. The other factors are around how you engage people in this process. So because these teams work collectively together, it's about working and participating together to come up with the solution. Everybody needs to be aware about why this is important to the success of their team and why it's needed. There'll be more collaborative design in this process. So again, when I've worked on a solution which was a volunteer management solution in this type of environment, they brought volunteers in and actually tested the system with them, got their feedback on it. So it was a very collaborative process because they wanted to make sure that what they were putting in place was going to be fit for purpose for what they needed it for. It was going to meet the needs of those volunteers or meet the needs of the beneficiaries. It's much more of a collaborative process because they're being driven by that external influence, and so they need to make sure they're meeting the need of that external influence. So that's something to pick up initially. And then the final is that people need to be supported through change, particularly if your system is interacting with external stakeholders in any way. You'll have to support them through change, and a team will need to get on board. So that's an organism type environment. And then the final one is flux and transformation. And the best way of explaining this, and you'd see it most often, is in small startup businesses. You know, it's where people are finding their feet quite a lot. They've got the capacity to self-organize, change, self-renew. You know, they're going through changes quite quickly. They're learning, they're developing. they're used to change, chaos and complexity. What you'll find quite often is, how does this come about? Well, quite often it's a manager of a frontline team. A manager might be saying, well, I'm managing all my team on the front line, and they can't, they're struggling to manage cases, or they've got nowhere to log calls. The team are struggling, or it might be one of those frontline workers even saying, I need to do something, can we fix it here? So a whole team sort of having a pain point, and off the back of that, they're like, okay, well, we'll put together a business case. We'll present a business case to the team, the senior management team, and say, look, these are the problems we've got right now. This is what we need to put in place. This is what we're going to move forward with. And they need to put a business case forward to get sponsorship for it. So it's very much a bottom-up type approach to change. Typically it's not something, it's kind of the opposite to managed, in that the frontline workers are asking for this change and needing it because it'll make their lives easier, as opposed to if you take the machine, which is the opposite. The machine is very much like the senior managers going, you're now going to work like this. It's very much the other way around, and it's building that business case upwards, because what you can find, and where you might never see our CRM system, is maybe somebody in those teams will be like, well, we really need it, but it's actually getting it approved is the problem. And it's putting together a decent business case and somebody taking that on board, which is why the responsibility is somebody with authority. A manager of some level will need to listen to their team, identify the pain points, propose a solution, and take that to the people at the top, the executive team, that can then fund it. And that may be a trustee committee in a charity, for example, or a board of directors in a commercial one. So managers are definitely part of the process. It normally comes from conflict and tension in the team, and that there's problems in the way that they're currently working, which gives rise to the change. So going back to where I started, really, it's very much about, identifying, where did this change come about? Why did it come about? What was the need? Will help you understand which type of culture this organisation is. Now, when we think about your approach to these different areas, we've got different typical approaches that were recommended by Cameron and Green. So if you identify, a machine type environment, it's very top down approach, right? So it's management saying, yes, you must now deliver in this way. So that in practice, the senior manager drives the change, targets and timescales are specified, and resistance can be managed. The typical techniques that you would take forward is that they bring in consultants. The consultants will work with the senior management team, and then training will be escalated down to the rest of the organisation. So that would be your typical approach. And so for those that you're training, this will be new to them. They will need to be told why it's important, why it's changed, why it's being done in this way, but they are being trained on how it's going to be, as opposed to consulted on how it's going to be. So there's a very different approach. So again, you need to be mindful of that if you're working this type of environment. And just reflecting on that point, really, if you're in an organisation that wants to change its culture from perhaps a bottom up or an organism to a top down, that will be a whole shift that you'll just need to be mindful of, because maybe they'll want to change their culture to be more of a machine type environment, because maybe their problems are compliance hasn't been met, or there's some security issues or something. So they might be wanting to move to a machine type environment. So that's something to bring up in those first initial meetings that you have. And you can use this deck, in essence, and sort of learn from it and sort of explain the different options. The second is representation, which aligns with the political system. So we've talked about the influential person initiates change, but there's much more of a representation of views, in that political or that powerful person will gather people's input and put forward a case for doing this. So they will gather a champion group of stakeholders from different departments. They will get input of expertise and influence from those different departments, and a new way of working will be deployed. And those stakeholders may be managers, but they may be other people in those departments. But there's a certain level of discussion, representation, input from different people that allows that process to work really well. The third around organism is very much a collaborative approach. So it's about a need. There's an awareness around the need for change, which is very driven by these external factors we've talked about, and it's very clear to everybody that if we don't do this, there might be a problem for the organisation. And we talk about a burning platform, and that, look, if we don't do this, we're not going to win bids, we're not going to be compliant, we're not going to be able to be secure. There's a very stark awareness of a need for change. But the way that they may engage with people is through research techniques, so much more elicitation through your business analysis. You might do stakeholder participation with external groups, you might co-design solutions with them. It's much more collaborative. And then the final one is a bottom-up approach, which is where we're talking about individuals at the bottom identifying the need for change. There's problems, there's teams not working well together, and that's very much aligned with flux and transformation. So this is where change is initiated from the grassroots, but the management figures will help facilitate those processes and sort of get the buy-in for it to carry through. The typical techniques that you'd adopt in these environments, is around collective discussion forums. Again, everybody kind of will probably want to be involved. They might do questionnaires, they might get in a discussion group. You may have some one-to-one conversations, and from those discussions a plan will emerge, and then that plan will be presented to authority for acceptance, which is your business case to show the return on investment, to show why it's important, to kind of demonstrate why you need it. So hopefully that's given you an overview of the different types of culture and the different type of approach to change. So if you have any questions, then let me know. Put them in the deck. I would say these are short and sweet webinars for half an hour, so there's quite a lot to absorb there, but hopefully it's made sense to you and you can really reflect back on your own experiences. I think the summary slide here is one size doesn't fit all. You might find organisations have a mishmash of those cultures, maybe a couple that you recognise. You might need to dig down and really work with the organisation to assess their readiness and their culture, assess their culture now and in the future, and to talk to them about that. And then talk to them about the style and techniques that they think will suit. Don't just decide that by yourself, but actually discuss the style and techniques that the senior management team or the project manager and the team that you're working with feel are suitable for the project. So take a considered approach, make sure you do that, and then that will help you achieve high adoption and positive business outcomes in your approach. So if you've got any questions, let me know. You can put those in the chat now and I'll chat through. As I say, this is a small section from our Consultancy Skills Programme. Just to talk to you about this a little bit more, it's a 12-month membership programme, but it means you have 12 months access to the content, so you can certainly get qualified and knowledgeable in all of the different areas much quicker than that. I'll probably say you could turn it around in a month if you really wanted to. And so we go through all the content around the business analysis, change management, project management, and business analysis scripts for the different products of Salesforce, particularly Service and Sales Cloud, but also we've done ones for MPSP and Volunteers for Salesforce. We have group coaching sessions once a week, every Thursday, where everybody comes together, they ask questions, I mentor and support people within that group, and then we have a peer chatter group. So the cost of that is 1,200 inclusive of VAT, or you can do a monthly payment plan of 110. So if you're interested in finding out more about that, then please do drop me an email, a chat. There'll be an email coming out tomorrow. You can download a pack from our website, so you can have a look at that as well. But I think that the most benefits I found from learning all of these areas in more detail is you might be at a place where, I certainly find myself in this position where I wasn't sure on a structure, what the documentation was, what the process was, and didn't have a professional way of working when I set out to do consultancy. I was sort of feeling as I go and started to learn different things. And having done the courses, I very much came away with a clear structure, clear documentation, clear process, and that leads to then sort of a great solution and much higher engagement and understanding. And I guarantee now, with any of my projects, if something gets missed out of our structure or our approach, there will be a problem on that project. And so, I've nailed the sequence over the last 10 years. I've nailed it down, and I guarantee the problems will only come if something's missed. So yeah, if we can help you get started, if we can empower you with the skills and knowledge to manage a Salesforce implementation, I hope that has helped you today and given you an awareness around certainly a different area and different perspective to what you might have thought about before. And if we can help you, that would be great. And if you love the webinar today, then please do share it and tag it, and say hi to us and visit our website. I'll just check in if we've got any questions. Great to see. So Salvatore, so training, I can see training for the admin tier 1. Great to see that you're working through that at the moment. So all of this is added value for that. Great to see that you found it useful, and that's fantastic. So no specific questions right now. That's fantastic. So thank you very much for joining today. I'm hoping that's been useful. As I say, get in touch if you're interested in the course, and I'll speak to you all again very soon. Take care. Bye.